My background is I have been with the Sirdar Group since 2009. My role within the group is I'm the head of global research and development. I'm the co-creator of this very program, the Sirdar Applied Directorship Program, and I'm also the head of the Contribution Compass Business Unit, which is a very powerful profiling and team development tool that we use alongside our boards and our executive teams. And so it gives me great pleasure to share the insights we've had around working with implementing high-performance boards in private companies and observing the learnings that trainee directors go through on this journey we call the Applied Directorship Program. So in today's session, and I am recording, so after the session you'll get a copy of the recording. Anybody who's registered will also get a link to listen to the recording again. And really the journey of this program is really thinking about two parts. One is getting to grips with what it means to be a high performance director, and then the second part is looking at how might the Sirdar Applied Directorship Program support you to do that. And I will share some specific information around the program right at the end with some next steps if you're keen to join us or to learn more about the program starting in October in Nairobi. Okay, so let's get to it this afternoon. One of the slogans or catchphrases that is really important to us and really meaningful to us is what's in front of you right now, that good directors grow companies and great directors change lives. And this is a powerful statement that says, indeed, when we focus on growing companies, we can grow companies and they grow incrementally over time and it's all fantastic. But if we focus on what it is that we're here to do, the meaningful economic impact we're here to create, we actually need to be great directors. And by being great directors, we change companies and we change lives. We have a view that if you wait for our governments around the world, and all governments are the same, they're just varying activities, if we wait for the governments of the world to solve our global economic crisis and inequality in economic power, we will wait forever. And actually, it is through companies that we change the economic climate of our world, of our economies. And so one of the most important ways we do that is by changing how companies are governed and how their performance is driven by the head or the leader of the organization, which should be the board. So a very long-winded way of saying that our purpose is to create meaningful economic impact, and to do that by helping great directors change lives and make a meaningful economic impact. And I do hope that for all of you that are joining us on the call today, that this is a desire or a purpose or something that's meaningful to you. That if you are considering and thinking about directorship because you're wanting to create a new revenue stream or build a retirement plan, that's all great. Those are great reasons for becoming directors. But actually, what we're talking about here is you're talking about directors who want to change lives and make a meaningful economic impact in your economies. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through these 7 myths. And these 7 myths have been things that we have, we haven't read them in a book. This is not a book regurgitated. This is frontline learning of what we've experienced working with training and developing directors and implementing boards across a variety of different types of private companies, including a lot of family-led and family-held businesses. And the first thing that we have to, the first myth that we have to explode is this myth that we say that being a director means the word compliance and very boring legalese. And one of our directors said, okay, are you going to train me how to be a lawyer with this course? And I said, no. If we had to train lawyers, I wouldn't be here trying to put this course together. I'm not a lawyer. What we're here to do is create something really powerful. We're trying to drive performance while also driving conformance. So there is this idea when you say the words governance, and we avoid the word governance as much as you possibly can, but it has this stigma attached to it. When we think about boards and we think about directors and governance, we think of this idea of tick boxes, of law, of boring, of having to adhere to rules and standards, and that is what being a great director means. And it's just not true. So one of the things I want to share with you is this analogy of this process of skiing. Now, for us in Africa, we don't have as much opportunity to learn how to ski like we do in, if you live in Europe or in other colder climates like Russia. And so, this idea of this analogy is quite an interesting one. Unfortunately, I've had the chance of proving that I definitely can't ski. So I can tell you for a fact that I'm the worst person to tell you how to ski. But the principles are the same. When you are skiing, this is a cross-country skiing that you're looking at. When you are skiing, what's really important is you're using these two blades to move across country. And what's important in order to do that is to move your feet in a pattern, left and right, left and right. And what's most important is to never let the tips of your skis cross over. I learned that the hard way. And so this idea of skiing analogy helps us to understand this idea that driving economic performance in a company and a country requires two skis. One is performance and one is conformance. So this performance ski is all about pushing the boundaries of the organization, holding the company accountable to a standard higher than it's ever had before, driving its expansion and pushing the team and driving performance of the executive function. But at the same time, that must be tempered by the other ski, which is the ski of conformance. And this is all about making sure that the organization adheres to its rules. And its rules are internal rules, our internal standards, our policies, what the standard we set for ourselves internally, and the external rules that society and Companies Act, etc., imposes upon us from the outside in. So when we think about these processes of what it actually means to be a director, it's not about just being boring and legal. And we'll see later how that part fits onto the picture of governance and boards, but it's really only a small part. What we're talking about is continuously balancing performance and conformance. Two skis moving in unison, working together, and need to be together in order for the skier to get from A to B. So a really important concept to work with. Our second myth is that being a great director means great risk. Now, as part of the preparation for today, I tried to find some information on the Kenya Companies Act of 2005, trying to get to grips with to what extent might the amendments that you've had from the 1940s version have, be aligned or akin to the South African version. And I do imagine that there's quite a lot of similarities, particularly the UK version being the basis or the backbone of your 2005 edition. So one of the things I'm going to do is just talk a little bit of reference around the South African Act, and let's see how this ties into your understanding of the Kenya Companies Act. But there is this huge perception that nowadays, in today's world, that being a great director means great risk. And you think to yourself, gosh, it's such a responsibility, and there's so much that it asks of you. Is it really worth it? And what's important to remember is that all new Companies Acts, the Companies Act of 2005 would have had that, our 2008 version certainly does, is bringing into business and into corporate life a completely new way of looking at companies. From a South African perspective, there's a massive shift of putting on personal responsibility and liability onto directors, and asking us as directors to be a lot more conscious, knowing, and assertive around what we do, the decisions we make, how we make those decisions, and the consequences of that are suddenly personal liability. We could always hide behind, the structure of the company to say we're not personally liable, but actually that's all pretty much changing. So that's one area. The second area is that company structures by law are moving away from the very shareholder-centric view of the world to the stakeholder view of the world, where our task as directors is to hold the legitimate interests in mind of stakeholders, not just the shareholder. And so we are, as directors, being asked to look at the world from a completely different perspective. The challenge in a private company space, in a family-held company space, is that we seldom take the time to actually understand the laws that we are responsible for. So I will take a recent client example where this is a South African-based client, a private company, reasonably sized private company, founder-led, and what the company was doing was issuing the main founder, was also the main CEO of the company. He was earning a salary, and then the company was paying him a whole pile of dividends as a tax issue around paying him an extra salary. So he was getting his dividends out. And in the most recent financial year, they issued dividends to this director that equated the entire profit for the year. And if something had to go wrong, there were solvency issues and the creditors put this company into business rescue, this director could be held personally liable for breaching the Companies Act, for not following a good process of checking the solvency and liquidity before dividends were distributed. And this is one example of the thousands of examples we've come across where, as a director, it's not the inherent risk of being a director that's the problem. It's the lack of knowing what you're doing that's the problem. And so unless we create space to, in a practical way, help each other learn what it means to implement the compliance aspect, which we are responsible to do, so that we can drive the performance aspect. So the world is changing. We are thinking about business in a whole different way. The community that lives downstream from your organization has a vested interest in you not polluting their water. These are the things that directors are having to grapple with and are becoming more and more prevalent in the way we think about duties and responsibilities of directors. It all starts with getting to grips and understanding what it is that we are responsible to do. We can no longer hide behind the idea that, well, I didn't know that's what management were doing. If you were reasonably expected to know as a director of a company, you can be held liable for not knowing. So there is risk, but there are more remedies against the risk in our legislative frameworks than there is risk. So it's really about getting to grips with understanding how to manage the process and work around it. For example, great minutes, board minutes, are one of the most important tools that you as director can ever work with, and yet it's one of the areas that's normally seen as an admin task that's not important. It is absolutely critical to your protections director, no matter which country you might be in. Okay. So that was myth number 2. Myth number 3 says that being a great director means loads of letters after your name. And by that we mean that somehow, you're only as good a director as the number of qualifications that you have. And I must tell you that over the years we have, in our process of vetting and recruiting directors that we place onto boards of private companies, it's so fascinating to see that the whole long CVs that have got all the technical qualifications on them doesn't necessarily mean that that person can actually deliver value in the boardroom. And the reason is a very simple one, that in the boardroom, IQ is useful and great, yet EQ is absolutely fundamental. So the emotional intelligence, the EQ of a director, in our view, from practical observation over many years, is the most important thing to do well. And I'll give you an example of this. In our current group in Johannesburg, through the board simulation process, and I'll talk more about what that means a little bit later, through our board simulation process, as much as is humanly possible, our boards are put into an immersive experience where we encourage them to feel an emotional attachment for these starting up fake companies, but they're becoming really real companies to these people. And as they go through the process, to really, take on this company as if it's real and get involved and get emotionally attached. It's fine. That's what the process is about. And what's really interesting is that in this last group, last session, their feedback was, wow, for the first time we really feel like we really trust each other as directors. And it was a process, around the room. We think, oh, that's interesting. We have 4 boards into a board process, there's starting to be a relationship of trust that's established in board meetings. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in other research. And so what's interesting is that respect and trust is at the cornerstone of this team working together of achieving a unified outcome, especially where you have a founder sitting at that table, founder of the business, maybe the head of the family who's the CEO who founded the business, family business, and you have independent directors who are now sitting on the board, and there's all the power issues and all the interesting challenges that come with losing control and wanting to control the board and how decisions are made. And the pathway from getting from this collection of individuals to a unified board depends on the speed of establishing trust and right relationships. So you can imagine that if you put a director who's got PhDs and all kinds of amazing things behind his or her name, and you put that director onto a board, yet they cannot create trust and they cannot instill emotional intelligence around their boardroom, and they can't see the big chasm that a person has to cross in order to understand what a board means, and they can't see the huge emotional journey of the CEO founder who has to let go of the baby he or she created. If you can't get that as a director and you're stuck in the head, you can't deliver value. So as much as people might have lots of qualifications, those do help. At the end of the day, can you build trust and relate to people on a deep and meaningful level, and have the tough conversations, yet be good and honest and true to your word? So it's really a process of how we relate to each other. Relationship issues are by far the biggest obstacle we've seen in board processes. If we can sort those out, if we can, as directors, develop our capacity to feel empathy, yet drive performance and have the tough conversations, that's what makes a great director. Okay, myth number 4, that being a great director means pitching for board meetings. And by that we mean there's this misconceived idea that the board process, it starts when you arrive for the board meetings and the board meeting, and finishes when the board meeting is over. And that's your job done. We can say, great, we had a great meeting, board meeting is done, my job is now done. In reality, firstly, being a director is what we call one of selfless service. And by that I mean it is in the shareholders, what we call the shareholder hat. When you wear the shareholder hat, when you are a shareholder, your task is to be selfish. In other words, you put money into a business, you've made an investment of some kind, and you're expecting a return for that investment. Otherwise, you're going to remove your investment and take it somewhere else. That's where a shareholder should be thinking, using that shareholder hat. But a director has the responsibility by law to put the best interests of the company first. And that is a position of selfless service. Even if you are the shareholder, and this is where it really gets interesting in founder-led businesses. If you are the shareholder and you wear the shareholder hat, and you are a director and you wear the director hat, you've got a problem, because you are responsible to put the company first, not your investment first. And it also is not a process that you can switch on and switch off. When you sign that piece of paper that you warrant you're a director and you accept the responsibility of being a director on a company, in South Africa case, if you are acting like a director, even if a name isn't on that piece of paper, you're a deemed director, then it's 24/7. You're never off. It's not just a board meeting. You're always a director of the company, and therefore you're expected to be there when a director is there to support and rally the troops or deal with the drama. That's what a director is there to do. So selfless service, and there's a 24/7 commitment. It's not just the board meeting. There unfortunately is this idea that being on a large board, you arrive, there's great coffee and good snacks, you have a good board meeting, and then everyone goes and plays golf or goes on a walk and makes the real decisions outside the board meeting. That's what happens. So really it's an interesting dilemma when we have to wear the shareholder hat, the manager hat, and the director hat, how we deal with this. the best example I can give you of this conflict, this inherent conflict, is when you have a shareholder who's also a manager of the business, so we call them a shareholder manager, where you have a shareholder manager who owns the property in which the business operates. So you've got a building you've bought as a shareholder, but the business now leases the property from you. And now you've been in the property for 10, 15 years, it's no longer brand aligned, in fact the customers complain it's not accessible for them, etc. And now as a board, you've been asked by management to consider moving to another premises. And here's a board paper in front of you from the CEO saying, here's all the information, I found a better premises at a lower rate per square meter, I'd like to move, please approve this move. And 50%, 60% of the directors sitting around the table actually own the property and are earning the income from the rent that we're busy discussing. It's very awkward. And it requires, as I mentioned, that emotional intelligence to say, you know what, as a shareholder, I'm inherently conflicted right now because the property being discussed is actually my personal asset that I'm earning income from. And so therefore I need to remove myself from this conversation and not vote or participate because I'm inherently conflicted. In fact, I should actually leave the room, and here I go, the door's closing. And it's just creating that understanding, unless we understand that we are inherently conflicted if we are a shareholder manager, and we understand how to work around conflict and conflict of interests, unless we have an understanding of how to manage that, it's very difficult to do well. Okay, so that is myth number 4. Myth number 5 says that being a great director means being accountable to shareholders. Okay, and I must share with you a story, and Carl Bates has given me permission to share this story. Many times we've shared it, that in the process of finalizing his book, Traversing the Avalanche, we approached Professor Mervyn King of the King Commission fame to write a foreword for the book. He read through the book and he came back and said, to our absolute horror, I'm very sorry, I can't write the foreword for your book because there are some fundamental issues that I have with it. Fix the issues and I'll write the foreword. And we were devastated. Just having someone of that stature say that to you. So we went back to his notes and we sat down with him, and he very kindly gave us feedback. And it was really interesting. He said this idea that we are accountable to shareholders as a director, he says, is a great myth that perpetuates all the best research on governance and boards available. And he says it's simple. You cannot own a business just as you cannot own a human being. And he says, if you think about how companies are formed and how they're structured, you cannot own a human being, you cannot own a business. A company is a juristic person that lives and exists by itself. It has shareholders who provide the lifeblood or the resources or the investment to get the business going. They can choose to remove themselves and no longer invest. What they do choose to do is put a board in place to govern the business on their behalf, to maximize the contribution that business makes to the economy and to the greater stakeholders. And because it is a juristic person, it's its own thing. It cannot be owned. So we have this thing of saying business owner, I'm a business owner. And he said fundamentally there's two things. You cannot be a business owner because you cannot own a human being, so that has to be removed from the whole book. And second of all, the board is not accountable to shareholders. The board is only accountable to the company itself. Just as you think about the process of being a parent, you're responsible for this child, you're accountable for being the best parent you can be to the child, not to anything outside. And so these businesses, these companies are like our children, that we are there for a short time. We don't know how long we'll be there for, but we're there for a short time to govern and look after the best interests of the child, and that being the first and foremost responsibility. So it really was an interesting process. We learned a lot. We went back and we sat and we slowly worked through the whole book. We made the changes. We got the forward. Happy days. And so what we struggled with is this idea of business owner is so deeply entrenched in our language and our thinking. And Words are powerful. If we keep on saying the thing business owner, we perpetuate this idea that we own anything. You don't own anything. As a shareholder, you hold shares in a company. You don't own its assets. And so a key part of this process of directorship is shifting the way we think about things and the language that we use. So we now use the term shareholder manager to describe someone who happens to have shares in a business that they manage. Not a business owner, a shareholder manager. Okay, so myth number 6 says that being a great director means having big corporate board experience. Okay, and we've seen this, as I mentioned earlier, the same challenge of a director coming to us with all these qualifications and PhDs and masters and all kinds of things, and that being an indicator of directorship experience. And then we see something different. We see that it's not necessarily the correlation. What's really important is not that you've sat in a big corporate board experience, because in a private company, other things apply. Other challenges present themselves that you don't have in a big corporate experience. And the way we try and frame this is we say that in a private company, big corporate experience is great. What's really important, though, is demonstrated commercial acumen in everything. And this word commercial acumen is very powerful. It attempts to explain that your ability to add value as a director is not your technical knowledge of all the bits and pieces of paper and the laws and legalese. That's useful, but every director needs to have that. What you've got to do in that board meeting is you've got to help grow this company. That's what you're there to do. And you can have all the technical expertise in the world, but if you don't have commercial acumen, the ability to understand how to grow companies to the next level, if we can't deliver that value to the board every single time, we have got a major problem. And we really challenge our directors with the following statement: be exceptionally critical of your own performance. Every single board meeting, ask yourself, how did I add value in that board meeting? What could I have done, and why didn't I add that value? And it's about keeping our view on them. Our task is to grow the business that we're governing, both from a performance angle and from a conformance angle, both skis working together in partnership to grow and push this organization forward, to future-proof it, and to give it life in the uncertain future where who knows what's going to happen, because there's always something new on the horizon. So in a private company, demonstrated commercial acumen is absolutely everything. And we had a recent example, one of the board simulation activities, where the task was to, and you'll experience this on an applied directorship program, where you go through a board meeting to understand the 3 hats of shareholder, director, and manager. And you have this board meeting. It's one of the stages of the assessment, the process, and you have to make a decision based on this case study in front of you. What should you do next as a board about this company? And there were 3 boards in the room, and 2 of the boards came up with strategies. Right, our strategy we're going to focus on is X, Y, and Z. We're going to ask for this information, but this is the decision we're making now, etc. So everyone, those 2 boards made a decision based on a strategic direction. The 3rd board, their feedback, and the 3rd board finished their board meeting very quickly, and they were very chuffed that they were the fastest board in the room. And I said, okay, great, share with the other 2 boards what it is that you decided to do in your board meeting based on this case. And it was a pretty bad case, and funny enough, it's a case from a Kenyan travel company that we used for this particular exercise. And their answer was, well, we're going to ask management to return with a proposal on the business plan, and then we'll see from there. And I said, in a private company, and on this board were a couple of old school directors thinking in the typical big board scenario, lot of big boards, very management consulting background. And I said, private companies don't have time to wait for a board to take a whole month or 2 months or 3 months in between each board meeting to say, well, we'll wait on management to present the plan. Private companies don't have time to wait for that. They want action. They want the board to be adding value. And the difference with a private company and a public company is that a private company elects to have a board. A public company must. So if you as a director are sitting around that table and you haven't created value, tangible value for that company in a board meeting, you are done. So in a private company, it's different. You have to create commercial acumen in every single board meeting. Where can a board in a private company, sit back and hand over its strategy to a management team? So in other words, you're not now taking responsibility for strategy, which you are responsible for as a board. We're now not taking responsibility for our strategy. We're handing that over. We're sitting back and we're saying, we'll present a business plan and then we'll see. That is not great directorship. That is a recipe for disaster. And it really is a very different way of thinking about it. The second example I have for you is a few years ago I interviewed a director for one of our private clients, and we have a very structured method of making sure that we follow a good process when we interview directors, assessing commercial acumen. And this director came from highly recommended from big corporate experience, now coming into the private company space. And in the interview with him, one of the questions that I asked him on our list was, okay, give me an example of how you created value for the company through your interrogation and analysis of its financial statements. Seems like a pretty simple question. And his answer was, no. We don't do that on our boards. The accounting team presents the financials. And we just make sure that, they're in the pack. And everything kind of looks all right. And I thought to myself at that point, I don't think you have any idea, Mr. Director, how that one answer has completely terminated your application. Because a director, you are there to sit and interrogate, understand, and create value. And your financials are one of those areas. If we can't develop financial expertise, what are we doing around that boardroom table? And so his experience as a big company director was that the financial analysis happens somewhere else. And actually, on a private company board, you've got to unlock value through the numbers in front of you. You've got to understand and say, oh, that doesn't make sense. What is this and why is that variance? You don't have to prepare them or know all the accounting codes and protocols, but you've got to understand what the numbers are saying. And so that is another example of how big corporate experience doesn't necessarily make a great private company director. Now, the last myth I'd like to share with you this afternoon is myth number 7, that being a great director means you founded the company or you have executive experience. Okay, so this is now another angle on the same question. The myth number 6 we talked about, just because you've got big corporate experience doesn't mean you make a great director. And then the opposite is also true. Just because you founded the company or you have extensive executive experience means that you can actually bridge the gap and step into director. And so one of the key things we say is that business degrees do not teach us about directorship, and neither does managing a business. So 2 examples. Let's break that up into 2 pieces. First of all, our university and college programs do not in any way equip us to understand what it means to be a director. And I was at university doing a Bachelor of Commerce honors degree, and I finished that degree and I went into my working career. And many years later, I met Carl Bates and I joined the Sirdar group. And it was horrifying to me to realize, in unpacking what this thing called governance and boards is all about, that we don't teach it anywhere. There's theory of law and the technical stuff around directors that maybe you cover in studying the Companies Act if you do an accounting stream, but we're not prepared at all to be great directors. We're just prepared, we're prepared through the university system to be great employees. And we don't change economies by being great employees alone. We become leaders, we become entrepreneurs, we become directors. That's how we make change. And so for me, it's a tragedy that actually this is not something we learn in school. What does it really mean? Can you imagine how different our world would be? And of course, managing a business doesn't necessarily mean that you understand, what it means to be a director, because we don't learn it at school, we don't learn it in university, and we don't understand really this gap, this huge gap between being a manager and being a director. We have an exercise where, you do an exercise and you have to sit in a board and make a decision on which car to buy for a salesperson. And you go through this whole process, and what you actually learn from the process is that a director, a manager, you're wearing the manager hat, you've got a problem to solve, an immediate problem. I'm here and now, here's my problem, I'm trying to solve the problem. And that is a manager hat. I need to buy a car for the salesperson, which car am I going to buy? A director hat in the same scenario says, we don't want to have to keep on making this decision over and over again every time there's a question around a sales car vehicle. We want to put in place a policy that allows managers to make better decisions and free up the board's time. What's our policy on buying vehicles versus leased vehicles? Who gets vehicles? What happens to the old vehicle? And so it's a great way of understanding that when we wear the manager hat, and that's the hat we've worn, even if we are executives or chief executives of large companies, we are enmeshed in making decisions on an operational basis. It is hardwired into us. Stepping into the director zone, where you step away from the business and you now are no longer attached, it is quite a different thing. And so a practical example, I'm trying to really share as many examples to make it real for you as possible. In a recent class of one of our director training sessions, we do this 3 hats exercise, and in your director board meeting, you're basically making some decisions around retrenching people. And then you swap into a manager hat and you go into a manager discussion. And now you're the manager having to retrench the people because the board has told you this is what you're going to do. And it's so interesting to see the attachment at a manager level to the people, to their lives, their family. Even in a mock example, the people in the groups were sharing that they actually felt stressed about now having to go and tell these people that they've been retrenched. Whereas in a director, you're an arm's length away. You're doing what's in the best interests of the company without or necessarily all the emotional attachment. So my long way of saying that if you are a senior executive in your company, you might find the step from executive to director is easy, but you might also find it's not that easy. So let's not assume that. And the second part is that just because you are the founder of your organization does not necessarily mean that you understand that step either. So really important for us to work with that. Those were the 7 myths, and what I'd like to share with you next is that often we don't have a good picture of what a high performance board or high performing governance looks like in an organization. And we've over the years, many years ago, we created the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass as a tool because we saw that people were struggling to conceptualize what does this whole thing mean? How does it all fit together? What is the real meaning behind governance and boards? And so this model is something that we use both in Traversing the Avalanche and across all our programs to unpack and delve into the deeper levels of understanding of high performance boards. So like a compass, it has 4 directions. North is purpose, anchoring the organization towards its higher purpose. South is sustainability, making sure as much as you're reaching for a lofty ideal, for a big, hairy, audacious goal, you also have your feet on the ground, that you have sustainable plans and that it will go for the long term. On the east, we have our performance ski, where we focus and drive the organization to focus on performance. And on the west, we have the conformance ski, which is all about making sure the organization adheres to its standards. And so those set our 4 cardinal points of the 4 areas that a board should focus on. And then those get broken down into 8 areas, 8 key focus areas. And there's a lot more detail behind each one of these that we can share at some other time. We have strategy and direction, true north. We have organizational culture, both at a board level and across the organization. We have effective leadership, which is largely about performance managing the chief executive and the executive structures and leadership structures across the organization. We have stakeholder manager engagement, which is all about engaging broader stakeholders, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Shareholder returns is all about managing and engaging with a very important stakeholder, being the shareholder, and how we endeavor to set expectations and communicate delivery to and from the board and shareholders. Then we have risk management and compliance. So that's that little slice I was talking about earlier. We tend to think of governance and boards as the whole thing. It's just that slice, the risk management and compliance. So adherence to internal and external policies and standards, managing risk, and more importantly, activating the opportunity of risk, because every business has risk. It's how we activate and maximize the opportunity that we take in risk. Then financial results, the lifeblood of the organization, our financial performance and the financial systems that underpin them. And then lastly, evaluation and improvement, a culture of continuous improvement and being exceptionally critical of the organization's performance and the metrics to measure our achievement of the strategy. So that's really a reference point in terms of how we think about high-performing boards. Now, what I'd like to do is now move into sharing a little bit around the Applied Directorship Program. And the key thought, and this is I love this quote, this comes from Maslow, as in Maslow's pyramid. He says that if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And if we only have executive director experience or business, formerly known as business owner experience, we'll approach every problem with that tool. And so we have to, if we are involved in business, if we're growing businesses, if we are named as a director anywhere, we have to expand the skills and repertoire at our disposal. So I'm going to talk now about the Star Applied Directorship Program, and particularly the one for Kenya in October. If you would like to pop off and you've got what you needed, you're more than welcome. We're going to literally spend the next 10 minutes just going through the last bit and talking about what the program entails and what you can expect if you join us in October. All right, so as we do that, we have started the Applied Directorship Program in South Africa in January. We now have 3 groups running, a 4th group in October in Johannesburg, and then our 5th group in October in Kenya. And the whole principle of this program comes from our own experience of formal education and what's out there, which is technical book learning around what it means to be a director. And our experience personally and observing this in many boardrooms across South Africa and in African countries as well, is that a great director comes from practical experience, from commercial acumen, from emotional intelligence, from self-development, from a place of meaningful economic impact. And so we had worked with training directors for many years, and we wanted to provide a structured program that could take people to the next level and create opportunities for directors to step out of one level of thinking into another level of thinking. So a brief overview of some of the key features or the key attributes that we include. The one is there is a technical part. Okay, so there is a technical requirement that we develop our technical understanding and we work with understanding tools and process, and chairing a board meeting has a particular process to it, working with the agenda, getting timing right. There are technical things that we have to learn how to do. This technical knowledge we have to develop around the language and the terminology and the Companies Act and all that kind of thing. So there's a technical component we need to cover off. But we also need lots of tools. We can't just have the hammer in the tool belt. And so tools are really critical. It's about making sure we have in our toolkit a whole variety of things, because there are many wonderful tools to help us. And I mentioned earlier the example of minutes being one of the most important tools you have as a director, and understanding how effective minutes are and how to create effective minutes as a board, really critical. So there's loads and loads of tools that we have to learn about. The third aspect is the experience aspect. So we can study a book, a Companies Act, a technical book as much as we like. It's only when we've put that into experience, when we've experienced what it feels like to be a director and what the challenges are, that we can translate theory into practice. And so experiential learning is an absolutely critical part of this journey. We achieve this through the first 2 sessions of the 10-session program, through case studies, and from session 3 onwards right to session 10, it is through being in a simulated board process. And I'm going to talk a little later, give you some idea of what that process entails. The fourth aspect is personal growth. I've spoken quite a lot about commercial acumen, emotional intelligence, meaningful economic impact, having a purposeful intent as a director, and all those things tie to self-awareness and personal growth. There's a lot of reflection and internal development that takes place in this process, and we can see from the types of experiences that people are having that we're all being pushed to develop and to understand ourselves as directors, because if we do that when we sit around the boardroom table, it is a very powerful process. In particular, we focus on using the contribution compass methodology as our way of building our understanding of our natural energy, of our contribution as board members, and how to mature and enhance that contribution to our fellow directors. And then the fifth key feature is impact, about not just having this experience for experience sake, but actually making a positive impact, going out and taking what we've learned and translating that into meaningful economic impact in the economies in which we serve. So the program itself has over 10 sessions. There's one session a month, and each session is 4 hours in duration. So 10 months, one session a month over the 10 months. So in terms of actual class time, it's not a long commitment. Half a day, once a month. And in between that, however, there is a wealth of resources, videos, research reports, and assignments that you complete in between. And so we ask that when you think about joining us, you need to put aside the half day for the class, and you also need to put aside about 2.5 to 3 hours a week of development time. We had one person apply and said wanted to be put onto our register of directors, and we replied and said, actually, we require you, before you are able to do that, we require you to have either commenced or completed the Applied Direction program. And the gentleman's response was, I don't have time for that. And so our response was, if you don't have time to reinvest in your skills as a director, you don't have time to be a director. Because being a director is about a commitment to ongoing development, of keeping on growing and being exceptionally critical of our own performance and finding ways of adding more value because we are growing as people and as directors. So bear that in mind, half a day, once a month. That part's easy. It's then 2 to 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours of investment of time a week, and that's for watching videos and for reading and a little bit of assignment work. There's no multiple choice questions in this program, because how can a multiple choice quiz assess your capacity to deliver commercial acumen? And that's really our focus, our practical ability to deliver commercial acumen in the boards in which we serve. All right, so the 10 sessions as we go through is themed. The first 2 sessions are all themed. Session 1 is themed on foundation, so really putting in place the foundation understanding around what is a high performance board, different types of directors, the 3 hats, really establishing that kind of foundational understanding. Session 2, we go into looking at methodology. So we deal with a whole part of methodology related to minutes, agendas, chairing of the meeting, the structures around the delegation of authority, director appointment. We do a case study on, and everyone completes their contribution compass profile before session 2. So that's a real methodology piece. And from session 3 onwards, we start going through each of the 8 dimensions of the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass, starting with strategy and direction, then organizational culture, then effective leadership in session 5, through in session 6 to stakeholder engagement, shareholders, risk, financial results, and evaluation improvement in class 10. So those are very strong themes, and all the materials for each cycle are available on that theme. And besides the class time, we also have other structures like a WhatsApp group for learners to engage with. We have an online learning portal where all the information and the resources are kept, as well as an app for your phone so you can watch your videos and read your reports at wherever you are at any time. So we really try and provide as many opportunities to try and streamline the learning and make it as accessible and effective as possible. I promised I'd talk a little bit around the simulation process, which I'll do now. The simulator is a simulation based on a large university that uses the simulator in the United States. And what we've done is we have wrapped what is essentially a management, an executive management or MBA program simulator with a board process. And so what happens is that at the beginning of the simulation journey, class 2, you're allocated to your boards, and you'll remain in your boards for the duration of the program. We'll sit together, and that's your board allocation. And we balance those boards based on your natural energy, your gender, your experience. We try and create as much balance around the boardroom table as possible. And then you as a group, you as a market, you decide what it is, what product is your market, your industry manufacturing. And each of the boards, you work out what the name of your company is, and we have logos made for you. We're trying to have this experience as immersive as possible. And then every board meeting, you get your board papers circulated to you 5 to 10 days prior to the board meeting. There's financials in there, there's board discussion papers, decision papers, there's a packet you get, and then everyone will get a turn to be chairman, and we run through a formal board meeting process. And you make decisions as a board, those decisions get captured into the simulator, and when you come back to your board meeting for the next round, the impact of your decisions on your financials are reflected in your pack. And so what we do is we track the companies as we go through the simulator. We have, and you make decisions as a board, those decisions impact the simulation results. So you get this tangible experience of the decisions I make as a director impact this company that I'm responsible for. There's a fierce competition between the 3 boards at the moment as to who's going to be the grand winner at the end of the 10 months. It's a really powerful process, and there's some amazing nuggets of learning that have come out of it. So I'll give you a couple. I know we're almost up for time. One is the example I shared earlier, where the groups are experiencing that after the 4th board meeting, they're really now starting to feel a sense of trust. So it's boards focused in a safe space. How long that takes, they're starting to really feel, after 4 board meetings, a sense of trust. The other key learning is we had a couple of cases where people weren't preparing their board papers, and I could see from the back end that they were logging in late at night, the night before, or early in the morning to download their board papers, and it's quite a hefty pack. And there was one particular board where the majority of the board had not prepared. It kind of read it very last minute, and this board had a terrible board meeting. The following board, we also had the same problem, even though we stressed preparation and diligence is absolutely everything. No one did their homework. Terrible board meeting. And it got so bad that we had to do an intervention. We basically sit them down and say, if you guys don't pull yourself together, this company's going to go, down the tubes. And how they've turned it around just through preparation and being present and working hard as a board, and their company's now flying. It's those kinds of experiences, practical, real experiences, that really internalize learning. Not writing an exam or memorizing theory. It's putting into practice the things that make and break highly effective and high performance boards. Okay. I could talk all day about the simulator because there are so many nuggets that have come out of the process that I need an hour just to learn for that. Okay, so are you ready to join us? Is this something that you are keen to do? We are aiming to run a program in October in Kenya, and at the moment we're planning a launch event to in Nairobi in September. For those of you who are really keen and want to know more information, that you could meet with Carl at his talk and learn more about the program if you wanted to, if you're looking for more information to make a decision. And so our facilitator will travel to Nairobi once a month. We'll do the classes there, and the rest is all online. Okay, so these three types of categories we find people who find immense value out of this process. One are executives and managers. So in other words, you are you either preparing for an executive role or a non-executive role on a board. Great that you've got prior board experience, but not necessarily required. So you've got an executive or management hat, and you're wanting to either step into another hat or develop your understanding of the hat that you wear. So the executives and managers. Usually what is very useful is the chief executive or the chief financial officer, someone who finds himself on a board and now needs to figure out what they're going to do on this board, how they're going to add value rather than just be sitting around staring into space. Okay, so that's one role. The second role might be what we call the shareholder manager category. Shall I share a little bit about what that means? It's a founder or a shareholder who's also a manager in the business and is looking to develop either by stepping into a position as a non-executive director on another board or growing the company you founded at a higher accelerating rate, or perhaps considering putting a board in place and wanting to understand what it is that you should expect from a board and from yourself as a director around that table. And then the third category, what we call the independent directors. So you're looking for a bridging period from being a senior executive to an independent director, and are looking for the confidence and the experience that you can take that practical experience into your first appointment as an independent director, even if it is on a non-profit organization or in a small company where you're just getting the feel of it, you're getting the ropes in, but you're actually experiencing what it feels like to be an independent director. So those are kind of the three categories. If you fall into those categories, there's a good chance that the process will be very valuable for you.